3. The economics of family. The word property, once one of the most highly regarded words in the English language, has come in recent years to have a bad connotation because of the deliberate assault on the concept by socialists. The word, however, was important enough to be a basic aspect of freedom to men during the War of Independence, when a rallying cry was liberty and property. Now, however, even those who most defend property wince at its broader usage, the inclusion of people. Thus, most women would bridle at being described as property. But the word property should be regarded instead as a very highly possessive and affectionate term rather than a cold one. It comes from the Latin adjective proprius, meaning not common with others, own, special, several, individual, peculiar, particular, proper. It also has the sense of lasting, constant, enduring, permanent. St. Paul makes it clear that husband and wife, with respect to sex, have a property right in one another. 1 Corinthians 7, 4-5. Even more, it can be said that a man holds his wife as his property, and his children also. But because his wife and children have certain individual, particular, special, and continuing claims on him, they have a property right in him. Laws have at various times underlined these property rights in persons. Thus, some states do not permit a father to disinherit any child. The children are given a degree of permanent property rights in the father. Similarly, most states do not permit a wife to be disinherited. Her property right in her husband is safeguarded. The state now claims a property right over every man by laws of inheritance. At one time, the laws of Rome permitted the father to sell his children in terms of his property right, a power very common throughout history. The rationale of this power has been the protection of the family. To maintain the continuing life of the family in a time of economic crisis, a younger member, often a girl, was sold, on the principle that it was better for the family to survive a crisis by losing one member than for all to go under in starvation. In Japan, the sale of daughters to houses of prostitution to survive economic crises is still practiced. Such practices were routine and normal in biblical times. They were barred to Hebrews by biblical law. There shall be no whore of the daughters of Israel, nor a sodomite of the sons of Israel. Deuteronomy 23:17. Do not prostitute thy daughter, to cause her to be a whore, lest the land fall to whoredom, and the land become full of wickedness. Ye shall keep my Sabbaths, and reverence my sanctuary. I am the Lord. Leviticus 19:29-30. This way out of economic crisis is thus strongly forbidden by the law. Even more significant is the fact that in Leviticus 19:29-30, this bar on prostitution is clearly associated with Sabbath keeping and reverence for the sanctuary. The two verses are in effect one law, and they are separated from the other verses by the declaration, I am the Lord. Man's rest in the Lord requires a godly care and oversight with respect to his children, and a reverence for the sanctuary is incompatible with a sale of children into prostitution. Only in one sense could a father quote-unquote sell a daughter under biblical law, into marriage. This appears in Exodus 21:7-11. And if a man sell his daughter to be a maidservant, she shall not go out as the men servants do. If she please not her master, who hath betrothed her to himself, then shall he let her be redeemed. To sell her into a strange nation he shall have no power, seeing he hath dealt deceitfully with her. And if he have betrothed her unto his son, he shall deal with her after the manner of daughters. If he take him another wife, her food, her raiment, and her duty of marriage shall he not diminish. And if he do not these three things unto her, then shall she go out free without money. Marriage normally was by dowry. The groom gave a dowry to the bride which constituted her protection and children's inheritance. If there were no dowry, then there was no marriage, only concubinage. But here it is clearly marriage that is in view, and the word used is marriage. The girl is taken as a wife for either the man or for one of his sons. She is legally protected from being either a concubine or a slave. She cannot even be sent out into the fields like a slave. The girl clearly has the privileges of a dowered wife because there was a dowry. The dowry in this case went to the girl's family, not to her and her children. If the husband-to-be decided against marrying her, then the dowry is restored to him. The girl is quote-unquote redeemed. If he or a son married her and then denied her any wifely right, she then had a legitimate ground for divorce and left without any restoration of the dowry. The reference to quote-unquote duty of marriage is to her right of cohabitation. If the girl in question did not please the new family after the betrothal and before consummation, she resided with that family until the dowry was restored by her family or by another prospective husband. This is apparent in Leviticus 19:20, where "not at all redeemed" is more accurately to be translated as "not fully or entirely redeemed." If during that time the girl is either seduced or is guilty of fornication, she shall be scourged, or more accurately, there shall be visitation or inquisition to determine the truth of the matter. Quote, "This punishment, scourging, she only received when it was proved that she was a consenting party to the sin." Leviticus 19:20-22, end quote. The dowry was an important part of marriage. We meet it first in Jacob, who worked 7 years for Laban to earn a dowry for Rachel, Genesis 29:18. The pay for this service belonged to the bride as her dowry, and Rachel and Leah could indignantly speak of themselves as having been quote-unquote sold by their father, because he had withheld from them their dowry, Genesis 31:14-15. It was the family capital. It represented the wife's security in case of divorce where the husband was at fault. If she were at fault, she forfeited it. She could not alienate it from her children. There are indications that the normal dowry was about 3 years' wages. The dowry thus represented funds provided by the father of the groom, or by the groom through work, used to further the economic life of the new family. If the father of the bride added to this, it was his privilege and customary, but the basic dowry was from the groom or his family. The dowry was thus the father's blessing on his son's marriage, or a test of the young man's character in working for it. An unusual dowry appears in Saul's demand of David, 100 foreskins of the Philistines, 1 Samuel 18:25-27. Saul offered a test he felt would be too difficult for David to meet, but which David met. The European dowry is a reversal of the biblical principle. The girl's father provides it as a gift to the groom. This has led to an unhealthy situation with respect to marriage and the family. Girls become, in such a system, a liability. In 14th and 15th century Italy, quote, "fathers came to dread the birth of a girl child in view of the large dowry they would have to provide for her, and every year the prices in the marriage market rose." End quote. This led to a virtual destruction of the family, whereas the biblical dowry strengthened the family. The groom wanted the highest price before accepting a girl, and the father shopped for someone who would not bankrupt him by his demands. The protests of the clergy were to no avail. In its biblical form, the dowry had as its purpose an economic foundation for the new family. This aspect long lingered in America. Quote, "According to an old American custom, the father of the bride gave her a cow, which was intended to be the mother of a new herd to supply milk and meat for the new family." End quote. In cases of seduction and rape, the guilty party had to endower the girl with the dowry of a virgin. If marriage followed, he lost permanently any right of divorce as well. Exodus 22:16-17, Deuteronomy 22:28-29. If not, the girl in such a case went into her marriage to another man with a double dowry, one of 50 shekels of silver from her seducer and another from her husband. The bride's dowry was not only whatever her father gave her and what her husband endowered her with, but also the wisdom, skill, and character she brought into the marriage. As Ben Sirach wrote, quote, "A wise daughter shall bring an inheritance to her husband, but she that liveth dishonestly is her father's heaviness." Wisdom 22:4. The importance to the family of a good wife and a godly daughter-in-law is readily apparent in any culture, but in a family-centered society, her value is all the greater. Ben Sirach commented on these things very plainly. Quote, "A wicked woman is a chafing ox yoke. Taking hold of her is like grasping a scorpion. A drunken woman gets very angry and does not even cover up her own shame. A woman's immorality is revealed by her roving looks and by her eyelids. Keep a close watch over a headstrong daughter, for if she is allowed her liberty, she may take advantage of it. Keep watch over a roving eye, and do not be surprised if it offends against you. Like a thirsty traveler who opens his mouth and drinks of any water that is near, she will sit down before every tent peg and open her quiver to the arrow. The grace of a wife delights her husband, and her knowledge fattens his bones. A silent wife is a gift from the Lord, and a well-trained spirit is beyond estimation. A modest wife is blessing after blessing, and a self-controlled spirit no scale can weigh. Like the sun rising on the Lord's loftiest heights is the beauty of a good woman as she keeps her house in order. Like a lamp shining on the holy lampstand is a beautiful face on a good figure. Like gold pillars on silver bases are beautiful feet with shapely heels." Wisdom 26, 7-18. This clearly reflected a popular Hebraic standard. The biblical position is better stated in Proverbs 31, 10-31. A conspicuous difference is that Ben Sirach reflected a common taste for a silent wife. This is not the biblical requirement, which reads, "She openeth her mouth with wisdom, and in her tongue is the law of kindness." Proverbs 31:26. Ben Sirach called for a silent wife. God speaks instead of a talking wife, but one who speaks with wisdom and in kindness. Men as sinners prefer Ben Sirach's standard, and women as sinners want the privilege and right of speech without the requirement of wisdom and kindness. It should be added before leaving the subject of the dowry that since this often involved the family exercised considerable authority and often chose the wife. In the case of Isaac, his wife Rebekah was chosen by his parent, who provided the dowry. Isaac delighted in his chosen bride. In Jacob's case, Jacob chose Rachel and provided his own dowry. The element of parental choice was not absent in Jacob's case, in that both Rebekah and Isaac sent Jacob to Padan Aram to marry. Genesis 27:46 through 28, verse 9. Neither was the groom's concurrence in the parental choice absent from the arranged marriage. The whole point of the law of Exodus 21:7-11, the quote-unquote sale of a daughter, has reference to this. The girl in the household of the new family may or may not meet the approval of the prospective groom, and if not, in that case, she is to be redeemed. Another basic aspect of the economics of the family is the fact of support. This has a double aspect. First, the parents have a duty to provide for the children, to support them materially and spiritually. Christian education is a basic aspect of this support. The parents have an obligation to feed and clothe the child, both body and soul, and they are accountable to God for the discharge of this duty. Second, the children, when adults, have a duty also in this respect, to provide for their parents materially and spiritually as needed. Ben Sirach referred to this duty in Wisdom 3:12-16. This duty was emphatically underscored by Jesus Christ, who, from the cross, committed his mother Mary to St. John for care and support. "Woman, behold thy son." Then said he to the disciple, "Behold thy mother." John 19:26-27. The oral statements of a dying criminal were a legal testament. As Buckler pointed out, quote, "Dahlman has shown that among the rights and responsibilities of a dying criminal was the testamentary disposition of his estate and rights. For instance, Jewish marital legislation insisted that everything should be definitely settled before it was too late. It happened, for instance, that one who was crucified gave his wife, shortly before expiring, freedom to marry again, and so a bill of divorcement could be written out, which entitled her to marry another man before the actual death of her present husband. The case of our Lord was parallel to that of a married man, in that a principle of dominium was at stake. As the firstborn of Mary, he had both the authority and responsibility, which would have devolved on her second son, James. The automatic devolution was apparently undesirable, so our Lord used the authority he possessed as a dying criminal to commit her to the care of one whom he could trust, the beloved disciple." End quote. The implication of this is also that up to that moment, Jesus had maintained the responsibility for the care of his widowed mother. The other children may have assisted, but the government of the matter was in Jesus' hands. Jesus also condemned those who gave to God, but did not fulfill their responsibility of supporting their parents. "Well did Isaiah prophesy of you hypocrites, as it is written, 'This people honoreth me with their lips, but their heart is far from me. But in vain do they worship me, teaching as their doctrines the precepts of men. Ye leave the commandment of God, and hold fast the tradition of men.' And he said unto them, Full well do ye reject the commandment of God, that ye may keep your tradition. For Moses said, Honor thy father and thy mother, and he that speaketh evil of father or mother, let him die the death. But ye say, If a man shall say to his father or his mother, That wherewith thou mightest have been profited by me is Corban, that is to say, given to God, ye no longer suffer him to do aught for his father or his mother, making void the word of God by your tradition, which ye have delivered. And many such like things ye do." Mark 7, 6-13. Jesus, as the eldest son and main heir, made John, although only a cousin and not a brother, the eldest son and main heir in his stead, and gave him the responsibility for Mary's support. This illustrates clearly a central aspect of biblical family law and of biblical inheritance. The main heir supported and cared for the parents, as need required it. Abraham lived with Isaac and Jacob, not with Ishmael, or with his sons by Keturah. Isaac lived with Jacob, not Esau, and Jacob lived under the care and supervision of Joseph, and therefore gave to Joseph a double portion, by adopting Joseph's 2 sons as his heirs on equal terms with all his other sons. Genesis 48, 5-6. The converse holds equally true. The child which supports and cares for the aged parents is the main or true heir. For parents or the civil law to rule otherwise is to work against godly order. Inheritance is not a question of pity or feeling, but of godly order, and to set aside this principle is sinful. The question of inheritance and wills can best be understood if we examine the biblical word for a will or testament: blessing. An inheritance is precisely that, a blessing. And for a parent to confer a blessing or the central blessing on an unbelieving child or a rebellious and contemptuous child is to bless evil. Although some portions of biblical wills have the element of divine prophecy as well as testamentary disposition, it is important to note that they combine both blessings and curses, as witness Jacob's words to Reuben, Simeon, and Levi. Genesis 49, 3-7. To cut off a child is a total curse. The general rule of inheritance was limited primogeniture, that is, the oldest son who had the duty of providing for the entire family in case of need, or of governing the clan, receiving a double portion. If there were 2 sons, the estate was divided into 3 portions, the younger son receiving 1/3. The parents had a duty to provide an inheritance, as far as their means afforded, 2 Corinthians 12:14. The father could not alienate a godly firstborn son because of personal feelings, such as a dislike for the son's mother and a preference for a second wife. Deuteronomy 21, 15-17. Neither could he favor an ungodly son, an incorrigible delinquent who deserved to die. Deuteronomy 21, 18-21. Where there was no son, the inheritance went to the daughter or daughters. Numbers 27, 1-11. If by reason of disobedience or unbelief a man in effect had no son, then the daughter became the heir and son, as it were. If there were neither sons nor daughters, the next of kin inherited. Numbers 27, 9-11. The son of a concubine could inherit unless sent away or given a settlement. Genesis 21:10 and chapter 25, 1-6. A maid could be her mistress's heir. Proverbs 30:23. And a slave could also inherit. Genesis 15, 1-4. Since he was in a real sense a family member. Foreign bondmen could also be inherited. Leviticus 25:46. The inheritance of one tribe could not be transferred to another. That is, the land of one area could not be alienated. Numbers 36, 1-12. A prince could give property to his sons as their inheritance, but not to a servant, lest this become a means of rewarding them to the detriment of his family. Ezekiel 46, 16-17. If some land were given by a prince to a servant, it reverted at the year of liberty to the prince's sons. The prince could not confiscate the people's inheritance or land. That is, the state could not seize property or confiscate it. Ezekiel 46:18. This latter is an important point in view of the contemporary situation. The biblical laws of inheritance are God's law. The modern laws of inheritance are the state's law. The state, moreover, is making itself progressively the main and sometimes, in some countries, the only heir. The state, in effect, is saying that it will receive the blessing above all others. There is, however, a perverse justice and logic in the state's position, in that it is assuming the dual roles of parent and child. It offers to educate all children and to support all needy families as the great father of all. It offers support to the aged as the true son and heir who is entitled to collect all of the inheritance as his own. In both roles, however, it is the great corrupter and is at war with God's established order, the family. A final aspect of the economics of the family. Throughout history, the basic welfare agency has been the family. The family in providing for its sick and needy members, in educating children, caring for parents, and in coping with emergencies and disasters, has done and is doing more than the state has ever done or can do. The state's intrusion into the realm of welfare and education leads to the bankrupting of people and state, and to the progressive deterioration of character. The family is strengthened by its discharge of those duties, which always lead to the decline of welfare states. The family is the basic economic unit of society, and the strongest one. No society can prosper which weakens the family, either by removing the family's responsibilities for education and welfare, or by limiting the family's control of its property and inheritance by usurpation. A final point. The biblical law of primogeniture was governed by the prior standard of moral and religious requirements. Whereas in Western European history primogeniture governed almost without exception, in biblical history the exceptions are almost the rule. In the biblical record, inheritance by primogeniture without moral qualification is rare. Again and again, the firstborn is set aside because of moral failure. Thus, very obviously, the spiritual and moral considerations governed inheritance, from the days of the patriarchs to Christ's testamental provision for Mary from the cross.